Hey guys, welcome back to All Things Outdoors. I was just hanging up some pictures from my Superstition Wilderness hike in Arizona, and I got to thinking about some of the different things that happened throughout the trip, and it really got me on this thought process of a correction of errors. So I want to kind of take this time and talk to you as well about some things that went well, some decisions that we made that were good decisions, but then there were some decisions that we made that we could have probably done without or made some better decisions. So let me share those with you right now. Okay, number one, first thing, the ULA Backpack. So between that 20 to 21 pounds that I carried versus its 18-pound recommended, it still carried extremely well, even though I didn't use or have a hip belt attached to it. And within that, I want to talk about something else. The sleep pad. I'm sorry, it's not a sleep pad. It's a sternum pad. However, it ended up being a sleep pad. When we decided to pull off trail, the weather was getting really brutal, starting to drop in temperature significantly. We decided to pull off, try to dry off as best we can, try to get prepared for a cold, cold night. Well, within that transition, his sleep pad got soaked. Unfortunately, using a down sleeping bag, that's not going to work. Where we ended up making camp, I pulled my sternum pad out of my ULA and give to him as a sleep pad. Now this is not very thick, obviously, but I will tell you this, it was thick enough to keep his core warm. The next thing that I give a A+ to, the Russell Baselayer Pants that I used. These, I usually do a good job of keeping me warm. They're for extreme weather. However, I did not expect them to wick away the moisture and the rain and the water as well as it did. I ended up hanging these on my ridgeline at night because they were soaked underneath my tarp. Every couple hours I would wake up, and where I had my pants hanging on my ridgeline and my hammock, I had them draping off of the side of it so it wouldn't drip any water into my hammock. They were completely froze solid when I first woke up. What I ended up doing is bringing them in with me, not long enough to get completely thawed out because I didn't want that moisture to transfer into my down, but just long enough to where I could pry them and turn them inside out, and then I put them back on my ridge line. I ended up doing that a couple times through the night, which it did help dry them out a little bit, but when you're in those conditions, they're not going to get dry unless you have a fire. But I will tell you, I ended up putting them on that next morning, and they still helped out quite a bit as far as keeping me warm. And again, the moisture and the water that it wicked away from my body was completely shocking at how well those did. The next thing, smart wool socks. I've raved about these before, but after hiking about three or 4 hours in the rain, my shoes were wet and my socks were wet, but my feet did not feel like they were waterlogged. I mean, they weren't even wrinkled by the time I pulled them off. So I always question the durability of this sock, but I'll never go with anything else just simply because of the amount of torture that I put these things through and rain and hiking in the rain. I can't ever question them again. One of the most vital decisions that I believe that we made, even though we weren't at our destination, we still had roughly a mile and a half to go to where we wanted to camp that night. We decided to pull off the trail early, and that proved to be the best decision of all. We found a halfway decent spot, no water. However, if you've seen the video, there was a little bit of trail magic that happened at that point, which was way cool. But we weren't stubborn with our plans. We had to be adaptable. Sometimes if you get to where I made a decision, I'm going to go to the spot that I picked out, I'm not going to go anywhere else, sometimes that's not the best decision. You end up getting to where you're even that much closer to either hypothermia or putting yourself in danger because of the weather. So pulling off trail, that was probably the best choice that we could have made at that point in time. Another thing that helped out, once we pulled off trail, I packed 2 top quilts for the reason being, I had a 40-degree burrow with 2 ounces of overstuff, which should get me down to a fairly decent temperature. However, I wasn't quite sure of the weather, so what I ended up doing, just to supplement that burrow, I took my Kohl's down quilt, and I'm glad I did. I was at a point to where I did get into my hammock. My feet were so cold, they were actually starting to hurt a little bit. By the time I crawled under that down, and then doubling up that down on my feet, really helped him out extremely well. The cool thing about having two top quilts, which again, that's extra weight that helped put me over my limit of that 18 pounds, that contributed a lot. But let me tell you, it's nice to have that comfort of knowing if it does get to extreme temperatures, I can use the option of supplementing my top quilt, or if it doesn't, then I don't have to. I can just leave it in the pack and then not worry about being too warm in the night's time. Another critical decision I believe that we made was once we did wake up after a brutal night, we ended up taking the time to start a fire, get dried off before we even headed out. Why be uncomfortable if you don't have to be? All right, my last thing that worked out really well was the Hokas. This was the first hike I took the Hoka Stinsons on. The Hokas were amazing. They actually did exactly what I wanted them to do on those extreme downhills down to Reavis Falls. I think I put in that video. It was a little of a challenging downhill, and I can tell you from previous hikes that I would have been in a lot of pain by the end of that day's hike. However, I was completely fine, no pain whatsoever. And I'll tell you this, the sharp rocks did not chew these up near as bad as what I thought they would. Yeah, you know, when I'm feeling this material, it's real kind of mushy and soft. I mean, it's really orthopedic for what I would, you know, think it would be for, you know, giving me that extra cushion in my knees. However, the rocks didn't chew it up near as bad as what I thought. So durability is a little better than what I thought these were going to be. And then on top of that, the performance was far exceeded my expectations. So 2 thumbs up to the Hoka Stinsons. All right, let's get into the bad. One thing I didn't bring that I wish I would have was gloves. As I stated with the Hokas that did really well with the rocks, my hands didn't do so well. I actually ended up getting a nasty gash on my thumb. It actually cut a chunk off of my thumb when I went to use a rock to pound in my tarp stake. Crazy thing, the rock didn't feel sharp. It felt like a normal rock that not sharp, no sharp edges whatsoever. But it actually cut my thumb so violently, not to gross you out, but it actually kind of splattered the blood across the top of the rock. So even though you don't think they're sharp, they can be extremely sharp, which was completely new and foreign to myself and completely surprising. Not to mention for the cold weather. I would have loved to have had gloves by the end of that second day's hike. My hands were really cold at that point in time and wet, and that would have been something that would have been a huge assistance in trying to set up my tarp with, you know, maybe some mechanics gloves on versus cold, frozen hands. Second thing, don't trust secondhand weather reports. Just like weathermen, they're not always accurate, so you always have to be prepared for the worst. We had no idea that we'd actually be walking off of a ridge in 40-mile-an-hour winds and thunderstorms, literally thunder and lightning rolling over our heads. That was a huge concern. In fact, that was one of the reasons why, as cold-soaked as we were, there was no choice to even go back. If something would have went wrong, we still couldn't go back because it's not worth going up back on top of that ridge to try to get back to the vehicle when there's thunder and lightning. I'll tell you, I've never heard thunder roll like I did out in that Superstition wilderness. It actually was kind of bittersweet. It was terrifying, but at the same time, it was way cool. It had just been way cooler to hear, maybe from inside of my house. Number 3, I talked a little bit about the ULA pad that's in my backpack, how it helped save Jim's core temperature from not getting below those hypothermia levels. It really kept his core base warm, which is the most vital. The one thing that we could have done that we thought about later on, and Jim actually thought of this, is that he should have grabbed his pad and slid it under the bivvy. His bivvy's waterproof. There's no moisture that's going to get through that, and by taking that pad and sliding it under his bivvy, he's not going to get the moisture of that pad, but yet he's still going to be off of that ground. Not only did he have a little bit of a bobble, but I did as well. In the haste of trying to get my tarp set up, I was really struggling with the ground. It was very rocky underneath a thin layer of soil. trying to get the stakes deep enough to hold. And even if I did get them deep enough, the wind was blowing so hard, it was literally taking the chunks of dirt with the stake out of the ground because it was so saturated from all the rain and water. What I should have done, again, hindsight's 2020, there were plenty of big rocks around. I should have just taken taken 4 large rocks, put them on the corner of my tarp, put the line around them, to hold that tarp down. That would have actually saved what happened throughout the night. My tarp would be blown wide open and the stake would come out, and I'd find myself rushing to grab my tarp and pull it back down as I'm getting out of the hammock to try to keep my underquilt dry. Now, with that in mind, when the freezing rain started,
alright,
it did help but when it was sticking to my tarp, weighing down my tarp sides so they wouldn't blow open as easily. That was one thing that I noted to myself when I hit my tarp. The freezing rain went sliding off of it. All of a sudden it opened wide open like a parachute. Well, pulled it back down, drove back into the ground, got back in the hammock, and as the freezing rain started to build up on the tarp, I noticed that it was kind of caving into the tarp sides, and not only was it help holding the tarp down, it was actually kind of closing in a little bit of the gap that I had between my hammock and my tarp, which really helped me out substantially. So that was one way that Mother Nature kind of helped me out, and it was much appreciated. The next thing, the Be Free water filter. I've spoke highly of this filter, and I will continue to do so, and I'll continue to use it. But it did spring a little bit of leak at the neck of the Hydro flask. Now, I've had this happen before with other bags. When I use the Sawyer Mini, sometimes you get to where you're squeezing those bags too hard versus rolling the bags for Sawyer, or sometimes they just wear out. With that being said, I had a Hydro Pack seeker that I kept in my backpack if that ever happened. Now, Jim's water bottle did explode, so that's why we ended up using the Hydro Pack seeker for him to carry extra water. And I could still use my filter. I just had to kind of hold it away from the bottle so that when it dripped out the sides, I didn't get that dirty water dripping into my water bottle, so to contaminate it. So that was a little bit of frustrating. Not the world's worst thing that happened. It still was manageable. I continued to use it and find a way to use it safely, but that was a pretty big annoyance within the realm of things. Okay, last thing that I wish that I kind of would have done different, but even knowing the outcome, I probably wouldn't have. I love to hike in shorts. I'm a shorts guy. The Reavis Ranch Trail was very well maintained. It was open. There wasn't a lot of brushes hanging over. I can't say the same for the Reavis Falls Trail. In fact, when I got home, I didn't realize how bad it was, but right above my ankle on my right side, my leg was severely cut up from all the pricklies that are out there in the desert. But even knowing that, I probably still wouldn't have wore pants, so I would have still probably just wore the shorts. I want to leave on a side note. Make sure if you're ever going to the Reavis Ranch Trail, or if you ever find yourself on the Apache Junction Trail, four-wheel drive is highly recommended. The turns and the steep inclines on the roads, it's very much needed. All right, guys, I hope this helps. Just some correction of errors that I wanted to bring to myself and to your attention. So some things that will definitely help me in the future. Those good things I can learn from that went well, but then also those bad things we need to learn from as well also. So one, I don't make the same mistake again, and two, I have a better outcome over the mistakes that I made. And I'm always looking for better ways to do something, so if you ever have a comment, don't hesitate to leave them. They're graciously appreciated. So if you have a comment, be sure to leave it. If you've got ideas, suggestions, I can learn more from you guys than I can from my own experience. So I encourage you guys to be sure to leave those comments, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.